Hello students, how are you today? I believe you've been fine. You're welcome to today's class. In our previous lesson, we discussed on the Earth in space and we explained the rotation and revolution of the Earth. The Earth rotates about its own axis in an anti-clockwise direction, and it takes the Earth 24 hours to rotate around the Sun. The rotation of the Earth causes the day and night. Also, we discussed on the revolution of the Earth. The Earth revolves, the Earth moves around the Sun, and it takes the Earth 365 days, which is equal to 1 year, to make one revolution. The Moon also rotates and revolves around the Earth, and it takes the Moon 28 days to make one revolution, that is to revolve around the Earth. Also, in the previous class, we discussed on the eclipse, and we said an eclipse occurs when the Earth is in between the Sun and the Moon, or when the Moon gets in between the Sun and the Earth. We listed the two types of eclipse. The eclipse of the Sun, also known as the solar eclipse, and the eclipse of the Moon, also known as the lunar eclipse. The eclipse of the Sun occurs when the Moon gets in between the Sun and the Earth, thereby blocking the Earth from receiving light from the Sun. And the eclipse of the Moon, that is the lunar eclipse, occurs when the Earth gets in between the Sun and the Moon, thereby blocking the Moon from receiving light from the Sun, as it was discussed in our previous class. I believe you remember. Now, let's go to today's business. Satellites is our topic for today. Satellites. Satellites. In the broadcasting stations, the media industry, they use satellites to get information, to send and receive signals. Even in your various houses, the digital satellite television, that is this DSTV, you use the DSTV to send and receive information. You on your television and you tune into the channel you want to watch and you get the information. This is possible because of the satellite. Now, before we go to the details of the lesson, let's see our learning objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students should be able to, number one, define satellites. Number two, state the types of satellites. Number three, describe the operation of the satellites. And number four, mention the examples of artificial satellites and their uses. So these are what you must be able to explain at the end of the class. Now let's move on. Definition of satellites. A satellite is an object that orbits, that is, moves or revolves around a planet. A satellite is an object that orbits around a planet, that moves around a planet. For example, the Earth is a satellite because it orbits around the Sun. If you can remember, in our rotation and revolution of the Earth moves around the Sun. So the Earth is a satellite because it moves around the Sun. Likewise, the Moon is also a satellite because it orbits around the Earth, that is, it moves around the Earth. The Moon revolves around the Earth. So a satellite is an object that orbits around a planet. We have 9 planets, and these planets have their own satellites, especially the natural satellites. This natural satellite is the moon. So each of the planets have their own moon that moves around the satellite. Now, this is the picture of a satellite. This is how a satellite looks like. The transmitter will be there to transmit and the receiver to receive signal. This is how the satellite looks like. This is actually an artificial satellite. Now, we said satellites revolves around a planet. So the Earth is a planet in this case. So say the artificial satellite revolving around the Earth. So the satellites, these are the satellites moving around the Earth as the planets, to orbit around the Earth as the planet. Now, let's see the types of satellites, rather. Let's see the types of satellites. There are two types of satellites. We have the natural satellites and the artificial satellites. The natural satellites is a natural object which revolves around a larger natural object in space. Now, the Earth, we said the Earth revolves around the Sun. So the Earth is a natural satellite that revolves around the Sun, which is a larger natural satellite. So the Sun is bigger than the Earth. So the Earth is a natural object that revolves around a larger natural object, which is the Sun. I hope you understand that. In natural satellites, natural satellite is a natural object which revolves around a larger natural object in space. And now, for example, the Earth is a natural object, and the Earth revolves around a larger natural object, which is the Sun. So the Earth is a natural object that revolves around a larger natural object. So in this case, the Earth is a satellite that revolves around a larger natural object, which is the Sun. So the Earth is a satellite that revolves around the Sun. Also, the Moon is a satellite that revolves around the Earth. So here, the Moon is a natural object, and the Moon is smaller than the Earth. So the Earth is larger than the Moon. So the Earth is a larger natural object in this case. So the Moon is a satellite of the Earth. The Moon is a satellite of the Earth. Now let's move to artificial satellites. These are man-made satellites. They are man-made satellites. So artificial satellites is a machine or electronic device that is sent into the space and move around the Earth and other planets. Artificial satellites, what we have about artificial? Artificial means man-made, it's not natural. So artificial satellite is a machine or electronic device that is sent into the space and moves around the Earth and other planets. So, as you said, we have two types of satellites, the natural satellites and the artificial satellites. And we said the natural satellites revolves around a larger natural satellite. For example, the Moon is a satellite that revolves around the Sun. The Moon is a natural satellite, but it is smaller than the Earth. So the Earth is a larger natural satellite. Also, the Earth is a satellite that revolves around the Sun. So the Sun is a larger natural satellite. I hope you understand this. Now, also the artificial satellite is man-made, and it is a machine or electronic device that is sent into the space and moves around the Earth and other planets. Now, let's move on. Let's see the reason of launching a satellite into space. The reasons of launching a satellite into space. Number one, satellites are being launched into the space for telephone, television, and radio transmission. In broadcasting stations, in media industries, satellites are being used to send and receive signals. So that's what it is used for telephone, television, and radio transmission. Number two, for photography of a place, town, city, or country. The satellite can be used to map a place, to get the picture of a place, either replace a town, city, or even a country. Number three, satellite is used in the military to gather information about the enemy's location, about where their enemies are camping, their hideouts, and the enemy's troops. Also, satellite is used to gather information on geographical studies of a country. Geographical studies of a country, such as map making, to take a map of a country, or even to locate where natural resources are embedded. Natural resources like petroleum, crude oil, natural resources like crude oil, like gold, like silver, iron ore, and so on. So these are the reasons of launching satellites into space for telephone, television, and radio transmission to receive and send signal. Take photograph of place, town, city, or country used in the military to observe the enemy's location and their troop to get the enemy's hideouts where they are hiding. And also it is used to gather geographical studies of the country, such as map making and also location of natural resources, such as crude oil, gold, and so on. Now, let's move on and see the operation of the satellite. How does the satellite work? Here, for a satellite to work, the satellite is will be launched into the space together with a rocket. The rocket is a space vehicle, and the rocket, the satellites will be put into the rockets, and both the rocket and the satellites will be launched from the Earth into a space that is very of a high speed, at a distance, where the Earth's gravitational force of attraction will be equal to the force needed to keep the satellite moving freely in space. So here, the rockets and the satellites will be launched into the space, will be thrown into the space from the Earth. So the rocket is like a vehicle that will carry the satellite. So by the time the rocket gets at a very high altitude, at a very high distance, then the rocket will release the satellite into the space. And here, the Earth's gravitational force of attraction will be equal to the force that will be needed to keep the satellite moving freely in space. So the satellite moves around the Earth at that distance, and the satellite will carry out its assignment, of which it is being sent into the space to do. I'll come again here. Operation of the satellite. To launch the satellite into the space, a spaceship will be needed, a space vehicle such as the rockets. So the rocket will be the one to carry the satellite up into the space. So the rocket, together with the satellite, the satellite will be embedded in the rocket. So the rocket will be launched into the space. So at a very high altitude, at a very high distance, then the rocket will release the satellite. Then the satellite will be in the space to carry out its assignments, of which it is being launched into the space for. I believe you understand this. Now, let's move on and see the examples of artificial satellites and their uses. Don't forget we said we have two types of satellites, the natural satellites and the artificial satellites. Now let's see the examples of artificial satellites and their uses. Number one, we have the communication satellites, and this is used to send and receive signal very quickly from one place to another. This is used in the broadcasting station, and even in your house at home, you have the GSTV, is a type of satellite. It's a communication satellite used to receive signal from the broadcasting station. And even the broadcasting station, they have this communication satellite also if they want to get information, international news, international information to send, they will use this satellite to send and receive signal. Also, we have the weather satellites, and this supplies weather information for weather forecasts. The meteorologists, they are the scientists that study the weather condition. So they use weather satellites to study the weather condition. They use weather satellites to get updates on how the weather will look like, whether the following day or in the nearest future. And also we have number three, the observation satellites. This provide information for geographical studies of a country, such as map making, application of mineral resources. So observation satellites is used to provide geographical information. Is used to get geographical studies, such as map making, to take map of a particular country, and also to locate where mineral resources are embedded. Mineral resources like petroleum, gold, silver, iron ore, and so on. Then let's see the final examples of artificial satellite, the reconnaissance satellites. And these are used by the military to locate the enemy's camp, to locate the enemy's camp and troop, where the enemies are hiding, their hideouts. This satellite is used to locate the enemy's camp. Now, I believe you understand the class. Let's see the summary of what we've been learning so far. Define the satellites as as an object that orbits around the planets, and the types of satellites, the natural satellites and the artificial satellites. And we said the natural satellite is a natural object that orbits around another larger natural object. For example, we said the Earth is a satellite of the Sun, because the Earth is a natural object that moves around another larger natural object, which is the Sun. And also the Moon is the satellite of the Earth. The Moon is the natural object that orbits around the Earth, which is another larger natural object. The artificial satellites, they are man-made. They are electronic devices and machines that are launched into the space from the Earth to orbit around the Earth and other planets. We have the examples of artificial satellites and their uses. The communication satellites, the weather satellites used by the weather forecast, by the meteorologists for weather forecast. And we have the communication satellites, which is used to send and receive signal. Also, we have the observation satellites. This is used for geographical studies and also to locate where mineral resources are embedded. And we have the reconnaissance satellites. They are used by the military to locate the enemy's camp and troops. We also discussed the reasons of launching satellites into the space for communication, for weather forecast, to get the enemy's hideout and to locate mineral resources, and also to map a particular place on the earth, or to get the photograph of a particular town, country, place, city, and so on. Yes, you can get more information on this topic from this textbook, Basic Science for Junior Secondary School, Book 1 by Chiyo Motuile, and Spectrum Based Science for Junior Secondary School, Book 1 by Chiyo Uruede et al. And get this from more information about this. With this, we've come to the end of the class and the end of our topic for this term. I believe you've enjoyed the topic so far. Thank you for listening. And also ensure that you copy your notes up to date. Ensure that you copy your notes up to date and read your notes and do your assignments and read well for the test and examination. Bye for now. Thank you and stay blessed.